The official designation in the Galactic Consortium's star charts for the third planet of the Sol system was G778, designation aberrant. But in the hallowed, sterile halls of the Celestial Lyceum, among the aspirants and scions of the galaxy's most refined species, it was known by a different name, a cruder name, whispered with a mix of academic disdain and morbid fascination. They called it the Monster Factory, a planet of incomprehensible biological chaos. A world where life wasn't sculpted by careful eons of evolutionary pressure toward a perfect, stable form, but was instead thrown into a meat grinder of constant, violent change. The dominant species, these humans, were the factory's most grotesque and baffling product. To the Lumen, the ancient and crystalline beings who oversaw the consortium, humanity was a biological paradox, an evolutionary offense. Their DNA was a mess, a tangled scrapyard of viral code, vestigial traits, and unstable, rapid mutations. They were fragile, prone to 1,000 diseases, their bodies riddled with self-destructive cancers. They were emotionally volatile, driven by illogical passions, tribal loyalties, and self-defeating pride. Their entire history was a litany of war, famine, and self-inflicted ecological collapse. They were short-lived, their consciousness a fleeting spark in a vessel of decaying meat. They were, by every metric the consortium held dear, stability, longevity, genetic purity, psionic harmony, a catastrophic failure. The Monster Factory had churned out its masterpiece of imperfection. And so, when one of these monsters was admitted to the Celestial Lyceum, it was not as a student, but as a specimen. A walking, talking case study in biological failure, a living dissertation on why chaos must be pruned from the galactic garden. His name was Kai. He wasn't their strongest warrior or their most brilliant scientist. He was an anthropologist, chosen for his supposed ability to observe and report, to be the most articulate example of his species' inherent flaws. The other students, beings of light, of silicon, of psychic energy, gave him a wide berth. They watched him eat, a wet, organic process of grinding and dissolving. They watched him sleep, a bizarre and inefficient 8-hour coma. They saw the scars on his hands, tiny imperfections from a life of friction and impact, and they recoiled. To them, a scar was a symbol of failed design, a record of damage the body could not perfectly erase. For a human, it was just a Tuesday. They looked at Kai and saw everything wrong with the universe. What they failed to understand, what their entire philosophy prevented them from seeing, was that in a universe that is itself fundamentally chaotic, perfection is a cage, and the only true strength is the ability to adapt to the monstrous. This is the story of how they learned that lesson. This is the story of the day the galaxy stopped calling Earth a monster factory and started calling it the Forge of Gods, because they finally realized the specimen they were dissecting had been quietly, effortlessly, grading at the top of the class all semester. The curriculum of the Celestial Lyceum was designed to forge the next generation of galactic leaders, diplomats, and strategists for the Lumen Consortium. The initial coursework was simple for the assembled prodigies: astronavigation, xenolinguistics, galactic economic theory. Kai struggled as expected. His mind, accustomed to the messy, intuitive logic of human language, fought against the crystalline precision of Lumen mathematics. His tongue, evolved for the guttural and fluid sounds of Earth, could barely form the resonant psionic hums of high-level galactic diplomacy. The other students, like the shimmering, gaseous xylos or the rock-like, methodical geodes, excelled. They absorbed data, recited millennia of case law, and calculated orbital mechanics with an ease that was second nature. In these early evaluations, Kai was precisely where the Lumen expected him to be, the bottom percentile, a confirmation of their bias. The instructors, towering, impassive beings of pure light, would note his slow progress in their reports. Subject exhibits cognitive rigidity typical of a Class 4 chaotic biosphere, unable to process nonlinear temporal mechanics without significant conceptual crutches. Emotional responses to data sets are frequent and disruptive. To them, Kai's frustration was a design flaw. His moments of inspiration, which they called unstructured cognitive leaps, were just random noise. They were grading his ability to be like them, and by that metric, he was indeed a failure. But the theoretical coursework was only 1/3 of the Lyceum's evaluation. The true test, the part of the curriculum that separated mere intellects from true leaders, was the praxis. The praxis was a series of full-immersion, consciousness-linked simulations. They were not simple war games or diplomatic role-playing. They were brutal, hyper-realistic scenarios designed by a reclusive and feared Lumen master named Vorlag, an ancient being who believed that the consortium's greatest threat was not external invasion, but internal stagnation. The praxis simulations were his answer. They were designed to test not what a student knew, but how a student was. They tested resilience, creativity, and the ability to function when every perfect plan shatters into a million pieces. They tested the one thing the Lumens secretly feared: chaos. The first praxis simulation was a stellar engineering crisis. A trinary star system, vital to a consortium sector for its energy output, was showing signs of premature decay in one of its stars. The students were tasked with designing and implementing a solution to stabilize it. The other students were magnificent. They worked together, their minds linking in a seamless network of data. They designed gargantuan gravity regulators, matter conversion siphons, and temporal phasing fields. Their plans were elegant, perfect, and mathematically sound. Kai, plugged into his own simulation pod, was hopelessly out of his depth. He didn't understand the physics. He couldn't even begin to design the technology. He felt the familiar sting of failure, the cold dread of inadequacy that every human knows. He was about to concede the simulation when a secondary alert flashed across his vision. A complication. A solar flare, statistically improbable but not impossible, erupted from one of the healthy stars, aimed directly at the primary settlement in the system, a moon colony of a fragile, silicon-based life form. The other student groups registered the alert, of course. Their response was logical, calculated. They allocated a small percentage of their processing power to calculate evacuation protocols, factoring in acceptable losses. The primary objective, stabilizing the star, was paramount. A few million dead silicon life forms was a tragic but necessary cost, a simple variable in a cosmic equation. But Kai wasn't seeing an equation. He was seeing Pompeii. He was seeing Hurricane Katrina. He was seeing every story of disaster and desperate last-minute heroism he had ever heard. He didn't have the tools to fix the star, but he saw the people on the moon. He abandoned the primary objective completely. To the Lumen observers, this was an act of supreme academic failure, but Kai wasn't thinking about his grade. He scoured the simulation's asset list. No advanced technology. No superweapons, just the basic infrastructure of the system. He found the system's network of cargo haulers, slow, clumsy, primitive vessels used for shipping raw ore. He found the data logs for the sector's asteroid mining operations, and a jumbled, chaotic, typically human idea began to form. He couldn't stop the flare. He couldn't evacuate the colonists in time. But maybe he could give them a shield. He began frantically rerouting the automated mining drones and cargo ships. Instead of shipping ore, he programmed them to begin corralling asteroids from the system's belt. Not large ones, but thousands of smaller ones. It was a messy, ugly, brute force solution. It was inefficient. It was astronomically expensive in terms of fuel and resources. He didn't build a delicate, perfect gravity lens. He was building a wall. A crude, dirty wall of rock and ice, positioned between the flaring star and the vulnerable moon. The other students were finalizing their elegant solutions to the main problem, as Kai's fleet of repurposed junk haulers clumsily shoved a mountain of debris into position. The flare hit. The other students' simulations concluded. They had stabilized the star with a 98% efficiency rating. But in their calculations, the moon colony was sterilized. 14 million casualties, an acceptable loss. In Kai's simulation, his crude asteroid shield was battered. It buckled. Parts of it were vaporized, but it held. It absorbed the worst of the radiation. The moon colony survived. 97% of the population was saved. The star, however, was left completely untouched, continuing its decay. By the primary metric of the test, he had failed utterly. The grading algorithm, however, was designed by Vorlag. It was not simple. It weighed thousands of variables. And while Kai received a score of 0 for primary objective completion, his score for crisis improvisation and asset preservation was off the charts. It was so high, it broke the grading curve. When the final scores for the first praxis were posted, the other students, the prodigies, saw their names clustered in the 80th and 90th percentiles. And at the very top, with a composite score of 94.3, was the human, Kai. There was confusion. The other students assumed it was a data error, an anomaly. The monster from the factory must have glitched the system. The instructors ran a diagnostic, confident it was a mistake. The diagnostic confirmed the result. They were baffled. They dismissed it as a fluke. A chaotic system had responded to a chaotic event with a chaotic solution. It was a lucky roll of the dice, nothing more. They had no framework to understand that Kai hadn't been lucky. He had been practiced. His entire species' history was one long story of building asteroid shields out of garbage to survive the unexpected flare. The second praxis was a diplomatic simulation. The students were to negotiate a trade treaty with a newly discovered species, the ephemeral and logic-driven Cygnans. The Cygnans were telepathic, and their language was pure, unfiltered truth. They could not lie, and they could not comprehend deception. The goal was to secure mining rights to a rare mineral on their world without offending their strict literalist culture. The Xylos and the Geodes approached with perfect lumen protocol. They presented their offer with flawless logic, outlining the mutual benefits, the economic upsides, the technological exchange. But the Cygnans rejected every offer. They would scan the minds of the student diplomats and detect something, an ulterior motive, a hidden calculation. The students were being truthful about the facts of the deal, but the Cygnans could sense the core desire underneath, the desire to win the negotiation. The desire to get the best possible deal for the consortium. This drive for advantage, so fundamental to galactic politics, registered to the Cygnans as a form of impurity, a subtle deception of intent. The negotiations all stalled, ending in polite but firm refusal. Kai's turn came. He entered the simulation, standing before the shimmering, faceless Cygnans. He knew he was outmatched. He couldn't out-logic them. He couldn't offer them anything the other, more brilliant students hadn't, so he tried something else. He didn't begin with an offer. He didn't begin with a presentation. He began with an apology. He projected a simple, honest thought. I am Kai of Earth. My people are young, flawed, and often foolish. We are a species defined by our limitations. Forgive my presence. I am here to learn, not to take. The Lumen observers were appalled. Admitting weakness in a negotiation, it was tactical suicide, but the Cygnans paused. This was new. Every other diplomat had projected strength, confidence, superiority. This one projected vulnerability. Kai then did something even more bizarre. He didn't talk about the minerals, he talked about Earth. He projected images and feelings. He showed them the fragile beauty of a sunrise. He shared the illogical, overwhelming feeling of love for a child. He shared the bitter grief of loss. He showed them human art, music, poetry, all of it illogical, inefficient, and serving no practical purpose. He showed them the monster factory in all its terrible, beautiful, chaotic glory. He concluded, "We want your minerals not just to build our ships, but to build instruments that can create sounds like this. Not just to power our cities, but to light up galleries that hold paintings like this. We are imperfect. We are driven by these strange, illogical joys. We seek what you have not because it will make us superior, but because we hope it will help us in some small way to become better." He was not negotiating, he was confessing. He was offering the unvarnished, embarrassing, and brutally honest truth of his species. He hid nothing. The Signans conferred for a moment. Then their collective telepathic voice returned, soft and curious. "You are the first to offer us a truth we did not have to find for ourselves. The others offered us facts. You have offered us a reason. The treaty is yours." The simulation ended. Kai's score appeared, 99.1, again at the very top. This time it wasn't a fluke. The instructors pored over the data. The grading algorithm, Vorlag's masterpiece, had rewarded him for radical honesty and intersubjective resonance. Concepts so alien to the power dynamics of the consortium that they barely had words for them. They had spent millennia trying to hide their flaws, to project an image of perfection. The monster from the factory had just proven that the greatest diplomatic tool in the galaxy was the courage to admit you were flawed. The whispers in the halls began to change. The morbid fascination with Kai was now tinged with a sliver of confusing respect. He was still a monster, but he was a monster who was, somehow, winning. The third praxis was the one that broke them. It was the one that shattered their paradigm and forced them to look at the monster factory not with disdain, but with something approaching terror. It was a military simulation, a full-scale invasion. The enemy was a biological hive mind known only as the Scourge, a relentless swarm that consumed entire systems. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They only devoured. The students were given command of a standard consortium fleet and tasked with defending a sector of inhabited worlds. The Lumen-trained students were brilliant tacticians. They formed perfect fleet formations, executed flawless pincer movements, and used their advanced technology to devastating effect. They won battles. They destroyed billions of Scourge bioships, but the Scourge didn't care. For every ship they lost, 10 more took its place, birthed from consumed worlds. The students were fighting a war of attrition against an enemy with infinite resources. They were winning every battle, but they were losing the war. Their fleets were being ground down, their resources depleted. One by one, their simulations ended in failure, the last consortium ship overwhelmed by a tide of slavering, organic horror. Kai was given the same fleet, the same scenario. He watched the first wave of the Scourge approach. He knew he couldn't win a straight fight. Human history was filled with stories of fighting unwinnable wars, and the first lesson of those stories was always the same. If you fight on your enemy's terms, you have already lost. The consortium's way was to meet strength with greater strength. The human way was to find another way to fight. He looked at his fleet, perfect, gleaming ships of the line, advanced, powerful, and utterly predictable. He looked at the Scourge, a chaotic, swarming biological mass. He realized the consortium's strength, its order, its discipline, its technology was its greatest weakness in this context. It was predictable. The Scourge had adapted to fighting predictable, orderly fleets. He needed to be unpredictable. He needed to be more chaotic than the chaos he was facing. He did the unthinkable. He broke fleet doctrine. He ordered his ships to scatter, not in a panicked retreat, but in a controlled, chaotic dispersal. He turned his unified fleet into 100 independent guerrilla bands. He uploaded a new set of orders to his captains, orders that would have gotten him executed in a real war. The new primary objective was not to destroy the enemy. It was to cause trouble. His ships began a campaign of systematic, galaxy-brained harassment. A lone frigate would jump deep into Scourge territory, not to fight, but to detonate its own power core near one of their birthing planets, irradiating it just enough to disrupt their reproductive cycle. A squadron of corvettes wouldn't engage the main fleet, but would hunt down their slower, lumbering harvester ships, destroying their ability to gather resources. He turned his warships into pirates, saboteurs, and insurgents. He took his most advanced science vessel, a ship designed for research, and retrofitted its deep-scan sensors. He wasn't looking for military targets. He was looking for the Scourge's biology. He was a human, he knew plagues. He started looking for a virus. The Scourge was a hive mind, a single, interconnected consciousness. Kai knew that while such a system had immense strengths, it also had a single point of failure. If you could infect one, you could infect them all. While his fleet was dying in 1,000 small, painful cuts across the sector, buying him time, his science team isolated a dormant retrovirus within the Scourge's own genetic code. It was harmless, vestigial. But Kai's team, using the brutal, messy logic of human biological warfare, figured out how to weaponize it. They engineered a mutagen that would activate this dormant virus, causing it to attack the very psionic nodes that linked the hive mind together. It wouldn't kill the ships. It would drive them insane. It would sever the connection, turning the unified swarm into a panicked mob of individual, terrified creatures. The Lumen observers watched in absolute horror. This wasn't war. This was biological terrorism. This wasn't strategy. It was a war crime, but the simulation continued. Kai loaded the mutagen onto a single, automated stealth drone. He sent it not toward the Scourge fleet, but toward a recently consumed, still-digesting planetoid. He knew the Scourge would transport the raw biomass from that world back to its primary birthing pools. The drone delivered its payload, infecting the food supply. For days, nothing happened. Kai's fleet was down to 40%. He had lost dozens of ships and billions of simulated crewmen. The observers were preparing to mark his failure. And then it began. A single Scourge cruiser on the edge of the battle suddenly veered off course and fired on its own squadron. Then another. Within hours, the entire Scourge armada was tearing itself apart. The perfect, unified swarm had become a self-consuming frenzy of madness. The hive mind was screaming, and its own body was attacking the source of the pain. They weren't a threat anymore. They were just dying. The simulation ended. The sector was saved. But the cost was an act of biological warfare so horrific, so monstrous, that the Lumen had never even conceived of it. Kai's score loaded. It was a single, flashing number, 100, a perfect score, not just high, perfect. He hadn't just won. He had provided the only possible solution that resulted in total victory. This time there was no denying it. The data was irrefutable. In the quiet, sterile observation chamber, the ancient Lumen master, Vorlag, who had not been seen in person for a century, materialized. His form was a blinding column of silver light. He floated to the center of the room, and the other instructors bowed their heads. Vorlag's voice was not sound, but a thought projected directly into their minds. A thought of profound, earth-shattering revelation. For 10,000 years, he projected, we have cultivated a garden believing we were nurturing the strongest flowers. We were wrong. We have been cultivating a monoculture, beautiful, orderly, and fatally fragile. We have been pruning the weeds, believing them to be imperfections. He turned his light toward the main observation screen, which showed Kai, now disconnected from the simulation, looking tired and pale. The human monster. We called his world the Monster Factory, Vorlag continued, his thought laced with a dawning horror and awe. We were right. It is a factory, but it does not forge aberrations. It forges weapons. It forges answers. It forges survivors. In a universe of chaos, the only being fit to lead is the one who was born in the storm. We looked at his species' history of war and saw savagery. We should have seen a relentless, peer-reviewed testing ground for strategy. We saw their diseases and plagues and saw weakness. We should have seen the galaxy's most advanced biological laboratory. We saw their short, brutal lifespans and saw failure. We should have seen an evolutionary accelerator, forcing adaptation and ingenuity at a rate we can no longer even comprehend. He paused, letting the weight of his words crush the millennia of Lumen's certainty. Pull up Kai's comprehensive academic record, all of it. Cross-reference his praxis scores with his theoretical work. An instructor, trembling slightly, complied. The data flooded the main screen, a stark, undeniable pattern. In every test of pure, ordered knowledge, physics, math, history, Kai was at the bottom, a failure. But in every praxis simulation, every test of chaos, improvisation, and desperation, he was at the top. He wasn't just passing, he was defining the curve. He wasn't just a student, he was the master. He had been graded top of the class, in the only subjects that truly mattered all semester long. The brutal truth settled upon them. They had brought a monster into their perfect, sterile home not as a specimen, but as an unknowing inspector. Kai hadn't been learning from them. They were supposed to be learning from him. Their entire galactic philosophy, their belief in genetic purity and ordered existence was a fatal assumption. They had built a fortress of glass, beautiful and perfect, while outside the universe was picking up rocks, and it had just sent them a master stonemason. The consortium didn't just have a new top student, they had a new paradigm for survival. Earth was no longer G778, designation aberrant. It was reclassified that day. Its new designation was Strategic Asset, Class Omega. The Monster Factory was now the only hope for a galaxy that had just realized it was far more fragile than it ever imagined. And so we come to the brutal, honest truth at the heart of this story. For too long, you have been taught to see your own chaos as a weakness. Your struggles, your scars, your history of failures. You've been told these are things to be hidden, to be ashamed of, to be overcome and erased in the pursuit of some sterile, inhuman perfection. That is the galaxy's greatest lie. Your anxiety is not a flaw. It is a threat detection system forged in a world of constant danger. Your emotional scars are not signs of damage. They are a library of experiences, teaching you resilience that the comfortable and the coddled can never know. Your history of failure is not a record of your weakness. It is your praxis. It is the simulation that has been training you every single day to face a chaotic universe. You are from the Monster Factory. You were born in the storm. You have fought battles in your own mind and in your own life that would shatter these beings of supposed perfection. Their stability is a cage. Your adaptability is a weapon. Do not apologize for your humanity. Do not hide your flaws. They are the source of your power. The things you have survived have forged you into something far more powerful than any creature that has never had to struggle. Stop trying to be perfect. Perfection is fragile. It is a monoculture waiting for a blight. Instead, be anti-fragile, be human. Embrace the messy, chaotic, beautiful, terrifying reality of who you are. The universe is not a quiet garden. It is a raging storm, and you are the storm chaser, the monster, the survivor, the one who knows how to build a shield from garbage and turn a plague into a weapon. You are the one who has been at the top of the class all along. Now go out there and prove it.